Good afternoon, class. I'm Daniel Galvez, and this is my presentation on the limits of students' rights at school. My presentation was based off the question, how are the limitations of students' rights an illustration of the First Amendment in U.S. public schools? To start off, what is the First Amendment? Well, the First Amendment grants us the freedom of speech and expression, grants us the freedom of practice of any religion, and the practice of freedom of petition and assembly. The claim that I used in my presentation was the rules and restrictions in U.S. public schools force students to behave a certain way, and it affects their decision making. To solve this problem, schools should focus on more important problems. For example, making sure that each and every student at the school feels safe from harm and from any dangers, and prevent fights. Also, we should focus on the education system, to make sure that each and every student is getting the proper education that they need, and make sure the teacher's way of teaching is effective to the students' learning. Limiting students' rights in U.S. public schools affects their decision making. How so? Well, we have 5 minutes in between class, right? To go from one class to the next. In that time, you should be able to talk to a friend and socialize about your homework or even stuff outside of school. But staff and faculty, they force you to go to your next class. So for example, if your class is at the 5:30 hallway and you are currently at the 5:20 hallway, that gives you 30 seconds to go from one class to the next. But in that time, you can be talking to a friend or to a teacher, but teachers, they force you to go to class. This restricts the freedom of speech. Also, students have to be cautious of what they wear. We have to spend a lot of time in the morning to make sure that we don't violate any dress code policies, and that limits our freedom of expression. Limiting students' rights at public schools affects our behavior. Students cannot, in a lot of schools in the United States, students cannot protest or raise awareness at school. This restricts the right to assemble. For example, in the Tinker v. Des Moines case, 3 students were suspended for wearing black armbands around their arm. This was to raise awareness to stop the Vietnam War. But they were suspended, and because they were suspended, that restricts their First Amendment rights. And also, they were not forcing any violence or aggression. They were peacefully protesting, and they got suspended because of that. At Ingleside Middle School, I believe it was a dozen students, they got suspended. The school is in Phoenix, Arizona, for the student walkout, and they got suspended because of walking out for going outside of school property. To conclude, schools should focus more on more important problems such as the safety and the security and the education of the students. Other possible solutions could be to abandon the dress code, but this gives the students the ability to wear offensive things on their shirt or on their clothing. You could initiate the use of uniforms, but this also limits the freedom of expression for the students. You could add more time in between class, but that means that there will be more time in between class. This would shorten the amount of time in class, so classes would be more intensive. Thank you. What are your questions?
2 questions for you. First up, what evidence did you gather that you did not use?
I gathered some evidence. It was about actually the students in the Parkland shooting. I gathered evidence of their thoughts and how they felt that their rights were restricted because of the shooting. But I did not really use it in my presentation, as you can see, because I felt like that would add too much on how restricting restricting schools, how that would affect the right to assemble. So I felt like my presentation would head too much in that direction.
All right, and next question. What advice would you have for other researchers who consider this topic?
My advice would really to make a connection in between how your rights at school are limited and how that applies to the First Amendment. I had a hard time actually applying that at the beginning of my presentation. I had a hard time of actually applying how the limitations of students' rights apply to the First Amendment.
We're done.